Hello, Gothic American Literature, English 217, 417. Um, as I said, I want to give you some wrap-up thoughts on Flannery O'Connor. Reading through your forum posts, I can see that you really are sensing a lot of the subterranean currents that are going through all of Flannery's work, and really doing a good job of getting at some of the symbolism, some of the potential interpretations of what she's doing, etc. So I'm going to start with the river, and I'm going to try to do this quickly this time. I want to leave us with kind of a bookend for Flannery, and the difficulty is that there's so much. So, for example, let's get going. So, for example, first page of the river on 154, you get the thesis of the whole story from an unlikely source, the horrible, negligent father. The African-American nanny who's hired to keep this obviously unwanted child out of the hair of the partying parents shows up, and she says, "He ain't fixed right," which means he ain't dressed right, or, he's not dressed right, or he doesn't have his shirt buttoned up correctly, whatever. "He ain't fixed right," a loud voice said from the hall. "Oh, then for Christ's sake, fix him," the father muttered. "It's 6 o'clock in the morning." He was in his bathrobe and barefooted. When he got the child to the door and tried to shut it, he found her looming in it, a speckled skeleton in a long pea-green coat and felt helmet. "And his and my car fare," she said. "It'll be twice we have to ride the car." Okay, but what I'm getting at is the thesis is right here. Well then, for Christ's sake, fix him. Flannery isn't the only one to use swearing or profanity as a underhanded way to get at what she means. J.D. Salinger does this in Franny and Zooey, as well as Catcher in the Rye. But Franny and Zooey, there's all these like, "For Christ's sake, do this," or "God knows," but I'm using these phrases, which I wouldn't normally, because Salinger means them to be operating on two levels. Literally, do this for Christ's sake. Now, Salinger's novel or novella is in no way, well, it's not a Christian novel in any way, but he uses that technique, and Flannery is certainly doing that. So that's the thesis. What does that mean? For Christ's sake, fix him. This is the story of Bevel's salvation from a number of things, and his salvation, capital S, writ large. Man, this story, the river, and also Revelation, but the river, I'm gonna know. It's so moving to me every time, honestly, and more so as I've read it more times. And in fact, reading some passages, same with Revelation, they don't lose their grandeur or poignancy or bite. And in fact, looking over every word, it's just like, it hits me in the same way. And honestly, especially having kids, for those of you who have kids, just the sort of heartbreak of these parents blindly just ignoring this precious kid. At any rate, where I was going with the father bit, it's not just a thesis. This is a prayer. Of course, he doesn't mean it sincerely, but as we've talked about, Flannery is all about God's grace working through unexpected channels, right, in her story. So, well then, for Christ's sake, fix him. This is a prayer that this father doesn't know and isn't worthy to utter, frankly. But it's uttered through him, in spite of him. God's grace being an umbrella large enough even for me and this father, right? Okay, so there's always a lot of symbolism of different kinds with Flannery, and so I'm going to just pick one thread that connects to the end, and go with that. And that is, you guessed it, pigs. A number of you picked up on how everything for Bevel's family is a joke, you know. And he seems to be wanting, he doesn't realize that there's places and there's people and there might be a reality that isn't a joke. His parents don't take themselves seriously. They, are hung over and neglecting their kid, paying somebody else to take them away. Their life is inherently a joke, which is the only answer, perhaps, whether we think of it as a funny ha-ha joke or just something to distract us from the inevitability of the end and the inherent meaninglessness, not only of our own lives, but of the entire massive humanity once it's winked out, whether it's 100 years from now or 100,000 years from now. Bevel wants something that isn't a joke, that isn't just an imposed attempt at meaning, but it's rather meaning itself. Well, he gets taken to this woman's house, and there's these, basically typical young boys that are going to see what they can do with this naive city slicker poor kid. And so they say, hey, you want to come see the pigs? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Bevel, page 158 near the bottom. Bevel had never seen a real pig, but he had seen a pig in a book, and he knew they were what? Small, fat, pink animals with curly tails and round, grinning faces and bow ties. He leaned forward and pulled eagerly at the board. I mean, you can picture the kids' books with that kind of, pig, or even piglet from Pooh, right? Those of you who have experience with real hogs, with real pigs, we've done a pig roast at our house the last 3 years, and those are small, 100-pound, a little bit less pigs. And then one time ended up in Texas, butchering a whole hog that weighed a lot. I think it was like 350 pounds or something. Anyway, these are for real animals, okay? But he's never seen a real pig. It's pink, curly-tailed bow tie, okay? Pull harder, the littlest boy said. It's nice and rotten. Just lift out that nail. I won't get into the nails, the wood being pulled out, rotten wood symbolism. But he eased a long reddish nail out of the soft wood. Now you can lift up on the board and put your face to a quiet voice began. He had already done it, and another face, gray, wet, and sour, was pushing into his, knocking him down and back as it scraped out onto the plank. Something snorted over him and charged back again, rolling him over and pushing him up from behind, and then sending him forward, screaming through the yellow field while it bounded behind. This is a real pig, okay? What's the next time we come upon pigs? Next page, 160. When little Bevel looks up and sees, probably, basically your average white, blue-eyed, long-haired Jesus. That's okay. Hanging on the wall. He says, "Who's that?" Mrs. Conlon says, "That's Jesus." And then she quietly gets out a small book and she reads him this little kid's book of the life of Jesus. Well, what story do we get? It was a small book, pale brown on the outside with gold edges and a smell like old putty. It was full of pictures. One of the carpenter, that's Jesus, one of the carpenter driving a crowd of pigs out of a man. They were real pigs. Now he's both known the storybook pigs and he's encountered real pigs. He knows the reality of this powerful other that's outmatches him. They were real pigs, gray and sour looking. And Mrs. Conlon said Jesus had driven them all out of this one man. When she finished reading, she let him take. If you know the story, of course, this is when Jesus heals this demoniac who, you know, he talks to me, he says, what's your name? To, you know, this demon that's manifesting through him. And he says, you know, my name's Legion, for we are many. You know, horror story waiting to happen. And they say, please don't, you know, send us into hell permanently. Just send us into this flock of pigs, this herd of pigs over there. And Jesus says, okay. And he sends them to the pigs, and those pigs, you know, are crazed and they run off a cliff and into some water and die. And people are mad at him. They want to put Jesus to death. Okay, that's not the point. The pigs symbolize clearly, you know, evil forces. Okay, so pigs. And then we get to the ending. Now, Bevel has had a transformational experience being baptized. And what the key dynamic of his baptism is again, the not a joke phrase. And it comes up at the end when he goes back by himself to the river. Because he doesn't want just, he sensed that he encountered something. And so now he's like, that, I've tasted it once. That's all I want. This isn't a joke. This is something that touched me and changed me. I want that. So he goes back. And of course, I'm going to kind of skip around on these last two pages, 170 and 171, to pull together some of the themes. There's a lot. He's trying to get under the water. It's kind of interesting. He doesn't sink at first. He started under again, this is top of 171. In a second, he began to gasp and sputter, and his head reappeared on the surface. He started under again, and the same thing happened. Is he, you know, just bobbing up, or his natural instincts like won't let him force himself under? The river wouldn't have him. He tried again and came up choking. This was the way it had been when the preacher held him under. He had to fight with something that pushed him back in the face. Man, that isn't even where I was going specifically at that moment. That is, you could write that over every Flannery story and novel. He had to push back against something. He had to fight back against something that pushed him back in the face. He had to fight with something that pushed him back in the face. That's what Bevel has found. It's not, okay, what do I mean? It seems so clear to me, like it's in a flash, like Flannery's doing this. So let me unpack that a little. When he was baptized before, it was as if, of course, the man was actually, dunking him, had his hand on him, but it's something greater than that. He was encountering something real that wasn't himself. That's the heartbeat of Flannery's spirituality, which you wouldn't call spirituality. The heartbeat of her religion. She has no patience, as we said in our first Flannery video, no patience for just, this is kind of some nice religious thought. For her, if it's not real, then, as I said, and as I would say to all of us Christians, if it's not real, it's horseshit. You're wasting your life. And you ought to get on with, some other way, because it's no good as a sort of band-aid of, behavior. But anyway, that's what he's going for. This is what he's looking for. This is the way it had been when the preacher held him under. He had to fight with something that pushed him back in the face. He stopped and thought suddenly, it's another joke. It's just another joke. It's heartbreaking, thinking of this kid and the doubt he feels at that moment after all this. He thought how far he had come for nothing, and he began to hit and splash and kick the filthy river. Remember, Flannery's second, last, and best novel is called The Violent Bear It Away. From that verse, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent bear it away. Little Bevel is being given the chance to hit and splash and kick the filthy river. which is, of course, that liminal space, that divide between the human and the divine. It's that source of touching God. It's that source of God's presence. And he was not content for this surface experience. He's going to kick and splash the filthy river. His feet were already treading on nothing. He gave one low cry of pain and indignation. Okay, now, this is when the guy starts chasing whatever, and we know that Bevel dies. So what's going on? I'm going to go back to when we first meet that guy, because it's actually, I've tried to kind of like, oh, is it simple? And then you see some things and you're like, oh, okay, this part is really clear and it all kind of clicks. So I'll tell you in a second. But first of all, even before we get to him, the question that this story raises is, what is too high of a cost for encountering God? Okay, I wasn't being dramatic. I was trying to think of the best way to say that. And sometimes it's hard to kind of think about how to describe this. We have a mixed class, of people of all different backgrounds, and that's awesome. I love that. So there's some people that have had different experiences or not had different. Okay, I can say for myself that the right up there with the experiences of deepest love that I've had, with my family, my kids, my wife, and everything. I've experienced as real as anything that I've experienced the presence of God in different ways. And I'm not, I don't even want to, really talk about it in that way because, I read the philosophy books and I'm aware of the incredible fallibility of the human mind and etc. So, and this isn't, this isn't an apologetics class, but I'm saying, if you've tasted, and again, it's a taste, if you've seen just the outskirts of something like this, then you're like, yeah, the cost is I would drown, I would lose my life, whatever it might be. So this story, and then, it's a stab at a thesis, so you don't have to agree. What she's saying is, this is God's grace to Bevel, that he is allowed to die here at about 5 years old or whatever, instead of live having, being taken away from what he experienced in the river and baptism and then further. But there's another level that corroborates that. The man from the shack. Here we go. So back to page 170. He passed a shack with an orange gas pump in front of it, but he didn't see what? The old man looking out at nothing in particular from the doorway. Mr. Paradise was having an orange drink. He finished it slowly, squinting over the bottle at the small, plaid-coated figure disappearing down the road. He's drinking his thing. Kid doesn't see him. He's watching Bevel. It's already, just doing a literary analysis. It's already set up to be a little creepy, an old man watching this kid, not like, hey, wow, kid, you're without your parents. He's just drinking his thing, kind of hiding in the shadows, watching him. Then he set the empty bottle on a bench and, still squinting, wiped his sleeve over his mouth. He went in the shack and picked out a peppermint stick, a foot long and 2 inches thick, from the candy shelf, and stuck it in his hip pocket. Then he got in his car and drove slowly down the highway after the boy. I mean, you don't have to be Harold Bloom to put together that it's kind of creepy. This isn't a guy with good intentions. he's squinting after this kid, and then he, gets a candy stick and drives slowly down the highway after him. He does not have good intentions. And I don't like putting too fine a point on things like this, but there's clearly, Flannery is clearly making phallic references here. He puts this, it's not like a normal peppermint stick. He puts this peppermint stick in his hip pocket, It seems clear that Flannery's implying that this guy's wants to go abuse poor Bevel. Anyway, so then, and his name's Mr. Paradise, so it gets more complicated. So, then he sits there. Mr. Paradise had left his automobile back some way on the road, so he's hiding his car, and had walked to the place where he was accustomed to sit almost every day, holding an unbaited fish line in the water while he stared at the river passing in front of him. So this is, it seems like he's the kind of guy that does this often. He's, the fishing is just a ruse, a disguise. He's not even fishing. So that's the context for then, when Bevel desperately tries to get under the river. Like, he's like, I was here before, and it's like, it's not, where is that power that I felt? And then we get it on 171. His feet were already treading on nothing. He gave one low cry of pain and indignation. Then he heard a shout and turned his head and saw something like a giant pig bounding after him, shaking a red and white club and shouting. So this is Mr. Paradise. Why would he be called Mr. Paradise? And that's confusing for us, because it's like, clearly Bevel's dying, and paradise is another word for heaven, and it's like, is heaven? But I think it's been made abundantly clear that Mr. Paradise is, there's no ambivalence there. He's an evil character, and now he's associated, he's called a pig, something like a giant pig. And we saw, the real pigs are associated with demonic evil, right? And that's what Bevel encounters before he, hears the story of Jesus and then has his baptism experience. Anyway, so Mr. Paradise is associated with, he's called Giant Pig, shaking a red and white club, this peppermint stick. He clearly had ill intentions. Anyway, he plunged under once, and this time, Bevel, the waiting current caught him like a long, gentle hand and pulled him swiftly forward and down. For an instant, he was overcome with surprise. Then, since he was moving quickly and knew that he was getting somewhere, all his fury and his fear left him. Mr. Paradise's head appeared from time to time on the surface of the water. Finally, far downstream, the old man rose like some ancient water monster and stood empty-handed, staring with his dull eyes as far down the river line as he could see. Putting it all together, and let's wrap this up. Putting it all together, Bevel has been granted the grace to die, to see the face of God, and has been protected from, in a human sense, this pedophile, basically, but also this one who symbolizes the clutches of the world, Mr. Paradise. It's it's kind of tongue in cheek, Mr. Paradise, and it seems clearly like what the false, basically what his parents have, Mr. Paradise. This billboard version of happiness that basically is neglecting your kids with a headache at 6 a.m. And he's like some ancient water monster, Mr. Paradise. Clearly kind of a otherworldly, almost as if he is the serpent in the garden. and this soul has escaped his clutches and been brought safe to the kingdom of heaven. There's more evidence for that. He looks up at the sky. It's an unbroken fabric of blue with just the whole of the sun in it. It's a very Marian picture of grace. Blue is always Mary's color, as we talked about. And also, once he finally makes it, the waiting current, as if it's been waiting to bring him, is very motherly. The waiting current caught him like a long, gentle hand. And then his fury and fear left him. So the controversial question that the story raises is simply, can God's grace be seen in that way? And of course, it's fiction. I'll leave it at that. We modern Americans are so quick to be like, no, it's like, that's, it's too extreme or something. Okay. All right, Revelation. I'll make this one snappier, okay? Really, I will. I'm going to get my timer here. I'm going to make it really snappy. But look, I mean, heck, it's a lot shorter than one class period, right? And also, like I said, so some of the most profound theology ever written, but in fiction form. Okay, Revelation. So all of y'all got, the kind of main thrust of what's going on inside Mrs. Turpin, and her judgment and gradation of people is different than the kind of appearance that she wants to give. I want to look at the ending, just because I do want to go a little quicker. What the girl who throws the book at her says is, you're an old warthog from hell. Again, pigs, and it doesn't just crush Mrs. Turpin like, oh, I'm sad. It's like it strikes a chord in such a deep way. You can tell when she wakes up, it's not just that she's offended and back to her like, oh, that was scary, and like, oh, whoa, but it's changed her. Her voice is described as a growl after that. It's like unearthed who she really is. And from that moment on, Mrs. Turpin, and again, you could find so many things. Mrs. Turpin, what does that bring to mind? Maybe not for you, but if you were on a farm or lived in the 50s, I mean, turpentine is a cleaning agent. It's an astringent cleaning agent. Definitely brings to mind turpentine. She's always called Mrs. Turpin, And Claude, I mean, he's very much, he's a clump of earth. He's a clod. The names are really telling. And Mrs. Turpin, we see her at the end near her pig pen. This might have not been real obvious because none of us are farmers right now. I mean, I assume maybe some of you still live in the country, but she's bragging that her pigs don't live in the dirt and filth. And she's thinking to herself, our pigs are cleaner than some people. Mm-hmm. Anyway, their pigs are on, like a concrete pig, in a concrete pig pen. They hose it off, and these clean pigs. But you clean up a pig. The basic symbolism there, you clean up a pig, you wash it. That's not a bad thing, but it's still a pig. And Flannery, what's nuanced about this, what I love about the ending, is that Flannery isn't just like we might be, and I mentioned this in one of the first videos, I think. She's not like us. She's just like, clearly, here's the person we can judge, Mrs. Turpin. Of course we can judge her. And of course, Flannery is judging her the harshest of anybody. But if we let ourselves simply do that and kind of like, she's just like, she thinks these people are like this, and African Americans are here, but then even some quote white trash unquote are down here, and then it's like this much property. If we feel comfortable with ourselves because we can recognize Mrs. Turpin's hypocrisy, well then, we are Mrs. Turpin. Because it is better to be ordered. This is the ending. I'm skipping ahead a little. That's her. She has a beef with God once he calls her out. Because I feel like she did genuinely have gratitude. She's genuinely grateful for Claude. She has a genuine, though very limited, love for God and people. And so once God calls her out, of everybody in the room, she has a beef with God. And it's not just like the typical stories you have in, Pharisees. A lot of you know all these stories, but the two people go to pray. One's this tax collector, which is kind of a synonym for a sinner in Jesus's parables, and the other guy's Pharisee. And Pharisee, you know the story, but he raises his eyes to heaven and he says, "I thank you that I'm not like other people. For example, even this tax collector here, cheated, And then, when the tax collector prays, it says, he was not even willing to lift his eyes to heaven. But he closed his eyes and he beat his breast and he says, 'Woe is me, a sinner.' And Jesus says, 'I tell you, that man went down to his house justified, not the other one.'" Anyway, she's not just like that Pharisee. Of course, she is somewhat. What Flannery's doing is getting at what about the kind of middle of the road? There is some good there. Well, we get to the ending, and she says, "Why me?" she rumbled. And this is a beautiful, amazing scene. She's looking out over the valley. She's with her pigs. The sun is setting on a farm. You can just picture it. It's beautiful. The sun was behind the wood, very red, looking over the paling of trees like a farmer inspecting his own hogs. Again, the metonymy there. The God is the farmer looking at his own hogs and, in his eyes. And just like Mrs. Turpin taking care of hers. Anyway, she appeared to be the right sized woman to command the arena before her. I'm not quite there, sorry. "Why me?" she rumbled. "It's no trash around here, black or white, that I haven't given to. And break my back to the bone every day working and do for the church." She appeared to be the right sized woman to command the arena before her. "How am I a hog?" she demanded. "Exactly how am I like them?" And she jabbed the stream of water at the shoats. "There was plenty of trash there. It didn't have to be me." And this is where it's touching. "If you like trash better, go get yourself some trash then," she railed. "You could have made me trash, or an N-word. If trash is what you wanted, why didn't you make me trash?" She shook her fist with the hose in it, and a watery snake appeared momentarily in the air. Anytime you see a snake in any astute writer, there's probably some overtones, certainly with Flannery. She shook her fist, and a snake appears in the air with the hose, right? "I could quit working and take it easy and be filthy," she growled. "Lounge about the sidewalks all day, drinking root beer, dip snuff and spit in every puddle and have it all over my face. I could be nasty." In the deepening light, everything was taking on a mysterious hue. The pasture was growing a peculiar glassy green, and the streak of highway had turned to lavender. She braced herself for a final assault, and this time her voice rolled out over the pasture. "Go on!" she yelled. "Call me a hog! Call me a hog again! From hell! Call me a warthog from hell! Put that bottom rail on top. There'll still be a top and bottom." A garbled echo returned to her. She's calling out to God to answer. Here we go. A final surge of fury shook her, and she roared, "Who do you think you are?" She's yelling at God. The color of everything, field and crimson sky, burned for a moment with a transparent intensity. The question, her question, who do you think you are? The question carried over the pasture and across the highway and the cotton field and returned to her clearly like an answer from beyond the wood. Think about that for a second. An answer from beyond the wood, first of all. She could have called it a forest. She could have called it from beyond the woods or whatever. An answer from beyond the wood, it's definitely referencing the cross of Jesus made of wood that he was nailed to. An answer from beyond that experience of his. And it's an echo. And what was her question? Who do you think you are? And the question comes back to her. Who do you think you are? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out of it. And so this is an incidental, this next little bit. That was the answer. And this is it unfolding. A tiny truck, clods, appeared on the highway, heading rapidly out of sight. Its gears scraped thinly. It looked like a child's toy. At any moment, a bigger truck might smash into it and scatter clods and then inwards brains all over the road. Try to speed it along. So she watches it, holding her breath, because when it's out of view, she sees how fragile, even Claude's life is. And then, like a monumental statue coming to life, she bent her head slowly and gazed as if through the very heart of mystery down into the pig parlor at the Hogs. They had settled all in one corner around the old sow who was grunting softly. A red glow suffused them. They appeared to pant with a secret life. At last, it's a little bit later, she stares at the pigs, absorbing some abysmal life-giving knowledge. At last, she lifted her head. There was only a purple streak in the sky, cutting through a field of crimson. Purple is the color of suffering, and the sort of, it's the color of penance, or of the sort of bringing low in order to be made right. And what she sees on it is this bridge with all the souls. And, you read it, and it's beautiful. There's all people singing, whatever. Battalions of freaks and lunatics shouting and clapping and leaping like frogs. And bringing up the end of the procession was a tribe of people whom she recognized at once as those who, like herself and Claude, had always had a little of everything and the God-given wit to use it right. She leaned forward to observe them closer. They were marching behind the others with great dignity, accountable as they had always been for good order and common sense and respectable behavior. They alone were on key. Yet she could see by their shocked and altered faces that even their virtues were being burned away. Mrs. Turpin's permanently changed by this vision that she has. The answer that God gives her before, the revelation, the answer that God gives her isn't an answer. It's exactly of the kind that Job receives. For those of you who don't know the story of Job, he loses everything. Not just loses everything, but his wife and his children are killed. And this is a book of the Bible, the book of Job. And he doesn't sin. We see this view of heaven and God, and, Satan coming to him and saying, hey, let me go tempt Job. And God says, he won't, deny me or whatever. Job gets boils all over his flesh, gets sick, whatever. For 37 chapters, his friends talk to him and they say, well, maybe you did this, maybe that. Oh, you probably have some secret thing going on. God's punishing you. And the point of the book of Job is that no, God isn't punishing Job at all. And no, it's not because you did this or whatever. And it's not because and towards the end, Job just laments, like, why was I even born? I wish I'd never been born. I wish God would answer me, these sorts of things. Finally, after 37 chapters, there's a thunderstorm or a whirlwind, a huge storm out in the desert where Job has been with his friends. And Job is there, and this black wall of cloud approaches. In the beginning of chapter 38, says this, then God answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who then is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Where were you? And he goes through and he basically says, where were you when, the ocean began? And I said, thus far shall your proud waves come and no further, etc. And what he's doing there is similar to what Flannery is showing us with Mrs. Turpin, that Mrs. Turpin doesn't make the universe go. She's looking down at Claude in his little truck and how it can be squished. She's given that insight that life is precious, and she ought to be grateful, but that she doesn't decide the bottom and the top rung and all this, and that it's not necessarily understandable to her, the rankings, it's not even, but the way that God's crimson bridge to heaven, to himself, the way that it's organized, with the freaks leaping and clapping and praising God, with those who on earth seem to think they had everything in order, bringing up the rear. But the final thing I want to say there is that, because our theme with Flannery has been unexpected grace. The unexpected grace there is that we're ready to judge Mrs. Turpin, and yet God's grace goes even to those people in a surprising way, and it transforms them in the way that they need. Their faces are shocked as they realize that even their virtues are being burned away in the cleansing fire of the presence of God. It's not that they weren't virtues, the parts that were, like order and, yeah, it's good to be clean, Mrs. Turpin, whatever. It's not that they weren't virtues, but even the good things that separate us from our fellow human, the good things, those are things that need to be burned away. Maybe it's just our prudery, like Mrs. Turpin. Maybe it's, other things. Okay, that's it for Flannery for now. I know it's a long video, it's 2 stories. Thanks for putting in some awesome effort on her. Really impressed with all that you guys did. Talk to you soon about Child of God, and have a wonderful day. Thanks.